once we remove the macro craziness, I think there's a coiled spring element. So we still think Bitcoin's going to end the year above 200,000. I actually feel stronger about that today than I did when we made that forecast in December. You look at the fundamental data, there's a lot of buying from institutions, from governments, from corporations. I just don't think they're going to be able to keep crypto down this year.
Hougan opens with a bold yet counterintuitive take. Macroeconomic conditions usually don't matter, unless we're operating at the extremes. Over the past few months, we've seen exactly that, with steep 145% tariffs, aggressive interest rate hikes, and rising fears of economic shocks. But now, Hougan believes we're shifting back toward a more normalized environment, where macro factors are less likely to dominate the narrative. Now's a great time to hit that subscribe button. Let's go back to the interview.
I think macro doesn't matter unless we're at the extremes. The reason we've been focused on it over the last few months is we were potentially at the extremes, right? 145% tariffs, huge shock to the economy. I think we're back in a more normal space. My base case has always been that the government has outlawed recessions. And so one way or the other, they were going to come through with stimulus or with a reduction of tariffs or with interest rate reductions to keep things on a pretty steady path. I think that's where we are now. I think the crypto market will be driven by crypto-specific factors for the next few months, barring a massive macro shock, which I think we're not going to see. I think we're on a pretty normalized path now. We're in a huge bull cycle. I think what's happened over the last few months, you just mentioned, we had all these positive crypto developments. We had positive regulatory developments. We have institutional investors moving into the space. Crypto is sort of at a fundamental basis in its best point ever. That's been suppressed by the macro craziness, but I don't think it's been forgotten. And so once we remove the macro craziness, I think there's a coiled spring element. So we still think Bitcoin's going to end the year above 200,000. I actually feel stronger about that today than I did when we made that forecast in December. You look at the fundamental data, there's a lot of buying from institutions, from governments, from corporations. I just don't think they're going to be able to keep crypto down this year. There are two kinds of investors. One is an investor who doesn't have time to pay attention on a day-to-day basis, and they should just buy a diversified portfolio of altcoins and hold them for 10 years.
They should buy Bitwise index.
Or they could buy our index. They could do it themselves. They could buy, not just one. They should pick 10 and just ride them forever and be comfortable with it's going to go up and it's way down. If you're a more active investor, I think you both need to think about timing. And I actually think in this cycle, more than in previous cycles, you have to think about asset selection. Okay. I think in previous altcoin cycles, it has been a rising tide that lifts. I don't think we're going to see that anymore. I think investors are more focused on fundamentals. Look at what's happened in the two largest over the last 2 years. Solana ripped in 2024. Why? Because its fundamentals were good. Use was up, transaction activity was up, execution was great. Ethereum cratered. Why? For the exact reason. Why has ETH turned the corner? Because it started to improve on the fundamental basis. So I think there'll be an altcoin season in that the share of the market controlled by alts will go up, but I don't think it'll be evenly distributed. So I think there will be an opportunity for people to pick and choose. Yeah. I do think we're actually probably at a centralizing moment for the large chains right now, because I think one of the big forces driving the growth of L1 is going to be institutions moving into the space. It is going to be RWA and tokenized assets and stable coins. And it's a lot easier for JP Morgan to build on ETH than it is to build on the 12th largest L1. So I think Ethereum and Solana may increase their dominance of the space. That's not to say anything against the others, and we love many of them and we own many of them. I think they may need to look for applications outside of traditional DeFi if they're going to scale. I think that's, if you believe institutions are the next wave, they're going to bias towards Ethereum and Solana. Not one. I actually don't think one. I think Ethereum and Solana have a leadership slot. Okay. Bitcoin is money. It's the king of crypto. I think Bitcoin's an incredible investment on a risk-adjusted basis, but you can do more with blockchains than just make money. You can move money. You can move assets. You can move real-world assets. You can do DePIN. You can do DeFi. And that means there are other investments in this space, which could be the Netflix. So I think not every investor, if you're only worried about fiat debasement, just buy Bitcoin. But if you're interested in everything blockchain can do, you need exposure beyond Bitcoin. And I think there'll be some Netflix in the list of altcoins when we look back in 5 or 10 years. I think in crypto specific terms, I think they wanted to see ETH ship.
That's true.
Right? They wanted to see ETH ship. So that was the switch at the foundation. The criticism of ETH was it's a bunch of academics living in la la land while this train that is Solana just out executes them time and time again. So they want to see that there was a philosophical shift. They saw that when the ETH Foundation changed leadership and they said the right things. But then they want to see them deliver. And that's what Pectra was. Now, they were on track to deliver anyway, but it's a nice coincidence that followed that chain. I think they'll want to see them ship another major upgrade by the end of this year if you want this story to continue. But I think the 50% plus move reveals that people still had their eye on ETH and they were waiting for an excuse to buy, right? Like, why would you have bought ETH? It was just going down, but you're still bullish on the asset because there's still stable coins, there's still real world assets, and there's still, agentic AI. So people were still bullish on ETH. They were just waiting for an excuse to buy, and they got that excuse, the combination of the leadership change and the Pectra upgrade.
Hougan wraps up with a powerful analogy. Back in 2004, if you believed in the internet, you might have invested in Google and earned a 6,900% return. But if you picked Netflix, your return could have hit 100,000%. The point? Blockchain is a general purpose technology. Bitcoin might be the Google of crypto, but there will also be Netflixes, unexpected applications and platforms that deliver transformative impact and massive returns.
I think on the L1 space, I think it's going to be driven by fundamentals. And to me, what that means is we may be waiting for the fundamentals to catch up with reality, right? When you look at these L1s on a revenue basis or a user basis, they need a lot of growth, right? They need a lot of growth. And so, look, I'm bullish long-term on the L1 space. I even think it's a little bit of a contrarian bet. But could it chop sideways for 9 months? It absolutely could. I think on the public company side, I think there's some real gems that are delivering enormous growth and trading at relatively constrained multiples.
Right?
Yeah. I think it's actually interesting. I think the reason it trades at constrained multiples is that TradFi investors are afraid of crypto and crypto investors would rather speculate on tokens. So they're like an absence of buyers. And that means there's a value play in the corporate equity space. And they're really growing at enormous rates. You mentioned Robinhood and Coinbase, I think, will be two of the largest financial institutions in the world in the next 10 years. Right. So enormous, and there's a whole pipeline. I think DeFi may be a little special, actually. Okay. I'm really optimistic about DeFi for two reasons. One, use is up, right? We're not at all-time highs, but TVL's at all-time highs. And that's really notable. When you see that, it says something. The other is that I think DeFi tokens have suffered from the regulatory suppression more than anything else over the last couple of years. Regulatory suppression kept institutions from using DeFi, and it made DeFi tokenomics very difficult. Now that we have a regulatory unlock, I think there's some step function in growth, and those could be revalued upwards. They're incredible projects. Like, if you bring a TradFi investor into Aave, they think it's magic. And I think you can see, 10x style usage growth and significant returns in the DeFi space. I do think history has suggested that when pushed against the wall, governments come through with stimulus. And so even if the economy slows down a little bit, which I'm not sure it will. I mean, maybe a point on that. Tariffs are a negative shock to the economy, to be sure. But trade is not all of the economy, and it's offset by things like the rise of AI and the rise of biotech and the rise of crypto. So I'm not sure it's so negative. Maybe it's slightly negative. But again, I think we can trust the government not to let us hit the wall. So I'm not that worried about a growth pullback. It may get a little funky, but I don't think it's going to get bad enough to slow down the crypto train. It's so crazy. We're like the whiny teenage or the whiny kid who gets 100 presents for Christmas and is upset they didn't get the 101st. That's such a shocking announcement. Like, if you had gone back 5 years ago and said that would have happened, you would have said Bitcoin a million. And I think we will eventually get there. I also think it's actually important. Like, one of the last existential risks to Bitcoin was that the government would ban it or seize it. And instead, Bitcoin co-opted the US government. And if you co-opt the US government, you're going to co-opt a lot more governments along the way. So I think that's a great example of a really positive news story that was just suppressed and forgotten. But it's not gone away. It will come back. It will spring us forward as people realize what a big deal it is. Well, I think it realized it was in a hole and it stopped digging. Any turnaround usually has a few positive developments, and ETH did, right? They reworked the foundation leadership and put more market forward and more proactive people in charge. Then we had the Pectra upgrade, which actually went reasonably well, not perfectly, but reasonably well. Yeah, so we went back, if you go back to 2004 and you thought the internet was going to be a big deal, you might have picked the best company in the best space, which was Google. Search was dominant, Google was the leader, and that would have been a great investment. You'd be up 6,900%. That's pretty good. But the internet was a general purpose technology. You could also use it for B2B software like Salesforce, or you could use it for streaming video like Netflix, or you can use it for shopping like Amazon. There are these other use cases. Doesn't take away from the fact that Google is an incredible business and it was an incredible investment. But actually, since 2004, Netflix is up 100,000%, right? It's 1,000x. So Google did great. It was 69x, but you also could have missed 1,000x. I think the same thing is true with blockchain.
Matt Hougan's insights offer a clear roadmap for this new era of crypto investing, one driven less by macro fears and more by strong fundamentals, growing institutional adoption, and smart asset selection. From Bitcoin's push toward $200,000 to Ethereum's long-awaited resurgence, to DeFi's regulatory revival and overlooked equity opportunities, we're entering a phase that rewards those who stay sharp, patient, and committed. Whether you're here for sound money, unstoppable finance, or the next 100x innovation, the crypto market is maturing, and the opportunities have never been clearer. Tap the next video to gain more knowledge. See you on next video.